Så där, då är det dags att börja. Varmt välkomna, en varm applåd till panelen. Ni får presentera er själva. Varsågoda.
Dear audience, welcome to this seminar organized by the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan and SIDA. Our theme today, as you know, is Afghanistan and women's rights at the center of negotiations in the Afghan peace process. My name is Walter Vilkko. I will be the moderator today. I'm an advisor and a founding member of the NGO 1325 policy group that works with women, peace and security. We have a super exciting panel today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. What we're trying to grasp here is a quite complex reality. We're talking about a country that has been in armed conflict for some 40 years, since 1978. We also today see a very militarized context. We see a changing reality with the withdrawal of the international troops. And we also have a country that experienced elections which ended in basically a political stalemate. We also get reports from Afghanistan today about violence against civilians. The UN is reporting that the first half of 2015 was the most violent in Afghan modern history when we're talking about violence against civilians, or at least the most violent after the invasion in 2001. I'm going to hand over the word to the experts here, starting with Anna-Karin Johansson, the Secretary General of the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. Anna-Karin, the Swedish Committee has been in Afghanistan since the 1980s. You have thousands of staff on the ground, and you're facing this complex reality we're talking about. How do you manage with the current situation, and what is actually specific when we're saying that right now something is happening in Afghanistan? The security context is changing. How are you handling this?
Yes, as you say, the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan has been present in Afghanistan for over 35 years now. And it has been a complex situation all the time, starting with the Soviet invasion, continuing with the civil war, and then we had a time when the Taliban were ruling the country, and then we had the invasion from United States and the international military presence. And I would say that being able to change and to adapt to the circumstances is one of the most important things that we have to deal with. But I would also say that sometimes when I hear about the situation on a very overall level, I cannot really make it fit totally with the context on the countryside where we actually are. Swedish Committee for Afghanistan is present in almost half of the provinces in Afghanistan, and we work in the very countryside. That is where we are. That is where we meet women, children and men. And you know, they are living a life there. They are of course affected by all these other things. And right now we can see that women are kind of withdrawing from the more open society. They are withdrawing to the homes because of the deteriorating security situation, but also because some very traditional forces are strong right now. And this is a very worrying sign right now. But on the other hand, there are so many things happening there and that are very encouraging. And I feel much more optimistic every time I've been in Afghanistan. And I can take one example. I met some women in one of the northern provinces in Samangan. They have been working in a organization that is called community development councils that you have all around Afghanistan. And now they had the possibility to attend a course within the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan to become better in how they can handle their mandate to actually be part of decision making on a local level. and they had now applied for money from another organization, and now they were going to start a course in sewing. So they take the initiative and they make things moving. And I think this is something that we see in many areas of Afghanistan. It's very, very difficult, but things are also moving forward.
Thank you, Anna-Karin. During today's discussion, of course, we're going to talk about the harsh reality on the ground, but like Anna-Karin already did, we're also going to try to bring up the positive examples, the options we have, and the different opportunities to be able to bring in women to the peace process. Engela Ameri, I'm handing over to you. You were born in Afghanistan and arrived in Sweden some 2.5 years ago. You have a degree in social sciences, and beside your cultural knowledge of Afghanistan, you've also worked for the UN for 6 years in Kabul, which I think makes you a really interesting member of the panel. You have both the kind of systematic knowledge and you're a part of the Afghan culture. I'm wondering, when you're looking at Afghanistan today, is it the same country that you once left?
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, of course. When I left Afghanistan, it was another time. But everybody knows in the world that being a woman is hard. And to advocate or to be an advocate for the women's rights or human rights in Afghanistan is even tough, and it can lead to death. I was not exceptional in that context in Afghanistan. Of course, I was one of the women that was working for human rights, and I was involved into human rights issues in Afghanistan. It was not easy for me to work in a multicultural context at the United Nations. Of course, I was always, I was criticized for being a woman and for working in a multicultural context with the United Nations, where people are coming from other countries, and of course the local people are sometimes against their presence in Afghanistan. Today, the situation, if we compare today's situation with the last 4 years or the 5 years, I don't see so much change. But as long as we are coming close to the peace and negotiation with the Taliban, the women of Afghanistan are fearing to lose the achievements that they gained during the last decade in Afghanistan. And that's a big concern that they are continually asking the government of Afghanistan, the international community, and active women organizations in Afghanistan to help them to fulfill the commitments that they made. So it's a big concern for the women that they should be part of the peace process and their achievements should be saved.
When we're talking about women's participation, freedom of movement is one of the most basic foundations for being able to bring in women to any kind of talks. Could you describe your daily reality before you left Afghanistan? How was the freedom of movement for you?
It depends actually where you find yourself in Afghanistan as a woman. If you are in the bigger cities and you grew up with an educated family, open-minded family, then it's much easier for you to have the support of the family, at least if you don't have the support of the society, the religious leaders, and other elders in the community. So it's important that you have the support of your family, but of course, if someone or the girls or the women in the countryside, the situation is much tough. Because first, they do not have the support of their families and communities, then there's not enough security that should protect their physical presence in the community or at all levels. So normally the women advocates or the women human rights advocates in Afghanistan, they are the target of the insurgent groups, the Taliban. Like I said, I left Afghanistan due to the threats that were existed against me. And I was threatened to death. So it's not only me, it's a lot of women that they are so passionate, they are enthusiastic to work and to work for the human rights in Afghanistan, to promote human rights, including women's rights. But unfortunately, they are the direct target of the insurgents or anti-government elements.
Thank you, Ingela. We're going to move on to our third participant, Marianne von Malmborg, who is a program officer at SIDA, working with Afghanistan and also with a special responsibility within the field of gender. Sweden and SIDA have an enormous commitment in Afghanistan currently, and you're running a lot of different operations or projects there. Could you tell us, how are you adapting to the changing reality in Afghanistan, and what do you see right now are the most acute challenges?
The most acute challenges, I think, for women's participation in Afghanistan is, first of all, gender-based violence, security for women. We are talking a lot about the security in terms of the conflict situation, but for the women, they are also not secured in their own homes. This is a growing problem in Afghanistan, an increasing problem. So we are working with preventive measures to eliminate violence against women. But then also in terms of women to be participating in the society or including society, also they need to have education and also have economic means. So that's also an area where we are working, giving economic opportunities, working with literacy programs, etc. And then women needs to be included in political. We need to support political participation in not only the women that are in High Peace Council or in the parliament. Those are extremely important. Those are the ones who will be invited to negotiate with the Taliban. But also in other levels, like women in elections and women in the councils on the village level that Anna-Karin talked about, and on the provincial level. So there are so many. We are working we take a very broad approach when we are working with development in Afghanistan, and we have a support also from our nowadays feministic government that we should prioritize gender in everything we do. And this is a strength since in Afghanistan we are a lot of donors and not everybody have gender equality as their main priority. So we have a very important role to play there from Swedish side, and we also go together with our Nordic colleagues to always raise. This is our, you can say, flagship from Swedish side, that we are always putting gender equality very high on the agenda when we are I mean, not only in our projects and sectors that we work with, but we also have an influence on a higher level. We are, as a donor, requested to provide input in, for example, the high-level conferences for Afghanistan, where the government and the international community meet, for instance, Tokyo or London. We can influence here content of the conference and also representation. So this is an important role we have to play here. If I can also give you some examples more concrete, how we work with the women that are in the peace process, and I want to mention two two important things that the Swedish Development Corporation has contributed to. And one is through our cooperation with UN Women, giving support to the Minister of Women's Affairs, which has contributed to developing all the frameworks and policies and laws that are in place today in Afghanistan in order to promote women's rights and to protect women. So this is something that we can hold the government of Afghanistan responsible for. It's a commitment from their side, even if the challenge is more putting it to action. Now it's on paper at least. But also the women that are in high peace councils and the women in parliament that are part of the peace negotiation nowadays, we can also provide. We also give some support for activities where to give them capacity building and more. That could be everything from knowledge about the frameworks, the human rights, the laws, even Sharia law, so that they could have really sharp arguments and be really prepared when they are in those negotiations.
The headline of this seminar already indicates that, as in most peace processes globally, also in Afghanistan, the women and women's rights have been marginalized in the talks. And when we're talking about talks, I think it's good to clarify what do we mean? What kind of negotiations have there actually been between the government and the Taliban? Of course, these are the big kind of secrets, so there is no straightforward answer on that. But Anna-Karin, could you tell us a little bit about what kind of process we have seen?
I think it depends, how you describe it depends also on how long time you see. I mean, this is something that is going on constantly on different levels. But during the springtime this year, we could see that it was a kind of intensified process where on a very, very unofficial level, people, it was in their private capacity that was from NGOs, but also close to the government in Afghanistan, met with representatives from the Taliban. In these very, very unofficial talks, also some women were participating. And it slowly developed into one very actually one official meeting in Pakistan, but the day after, or just some days after this meeting, the news about Mullah Omar's death, the leader of the Taliban movement, was kind of erupting, and then all these talks stopped. One important thing I think happened during this the spring was that some women that are pretty important in the Afghan political world, for example Shukriya Barakhshai, who is leading the Committee for Defense in the Afghan parliament, she actually met with some representatives from the Taliban. And that is not only important that women are there from their position of power in Afghanistan, I think that is very important. But it was also on a symbolic level very, very important, because she was very badly injured a year ago in an attack against her as a very, very outspoken woman and women's rights. Not activist, but she's trying to promote women's rights in the government. So that was a very symbolic thing that happened, I think. But unfortunately, the process stopped. And there is a risk that women are not going to be very much included in the process. And I think there is a risk also in Afghanistan that who are the women that are participating? Who do they represent? Because the Afghan society is very... there are different ethnic groups. We have very, very big differences between the countryside and the town, as someone mentioned here. And who are these women really representing? And taking into account the difficulties for women to meet, to discuss, it is difficult to find a common road forward. And this would need very, very strong frames, I think. Maybe the international community could do more there to actually make it possible for Afghan women to meet and discuss what are the most important things. And I met with another woman in Afghanistan. She's also on from a very powerful family, and she is also in a very powerful situation or position. And she said to me that, yes, it's not so easy with these negotiations, because me, as a woman in Kabul, I have the possibility to work. I have the possibility to participate in many different situations in the society. For me, to have to put on my scarf, to have to stay in my home, that is something that is very, very difficult for me. But if I look at the women on the countryside, they might not be able to leave their home today either. And for them, it might be the most important that there is less violence in the society. But for me, as a woman in Kabul, that will mean, if the Taliban get more influence, that my life will be restricted. So it's not a very easy choices to make for women in Afghanistan either.
So Anna-Karin mentioned both women's representation, but also the issues that are brought up in the discussions, which are two different ways to promote the agenda of women, peace and security. I'm wondering, Engela, if you're considering Afghanistan and the Afghan culture, what measures do you think could or should be taken to make women's rights part of the core agenda in peace negotiations, since currently they aren't?
First of all, I would like to point out that Afghanistan is a very dependent country, both economically, and we need the support of international community. That's one of the things that make it significant that we need capacity building. For the women, we need support from the government of Afghanistan at the local level, from the international community, and from the organizations that are working for human rights, for the promotion of human rights in Afghanistan, to persuade, support the government of Afghanistan to give more space for the leadership positions of women in Afghanistan and in the government of Afghanistan. We have to communicate at the very ground level with the women, and we have to make the agenda according to the needs of the women, what they need, who represent the woman. This is very important. We have to communicate with the organizations that are active in the rural areas and the countrysides to facilitate knowledge sharing, trust building, and setting agenda for the upcoming negotiation with the Taliban. So I think we need this. It's significant that we bring women more in the leadership levels, because we do not have it today. Even the women's presence in the country or in the government of Afghanistan is very symbolic. So we have to jump from symbolic to a reality that women can play a significant role, and they have to be counted because they are half of the population of the country. This must be understood and accepted by the people.
So what you're saying is, among other things, that what we're signaling as supporting parties to the peace process is very important also. Marianne, could I get your take on what are we signaling? What is important in the Afghan peace talks, according to Western powers, say?
I cannot talk for everyone, since there are quite big players here that have not always been consistent to pushing for the women's inclusion or the women's rights. But I think from the donor side, what we have done until now have had some effect. I mean, if you compare from a few years back, looking at, I can take an example from one of the big conferences, like London conference. From the start, from what we were getting from the Afghan government was totally blank of any gender perspective or any. There were no women representatives at all in the delegations from Afghanistan and so on. And today, if you look, I mean, today in London conference 2014, there is gender equality is high on the agenda. The civil society is invited, and we have different, side seminars on gender equality. So it's much more. It's there in another way now than it used to be, and we have to take this as a good sign as well. But I agree with Angela and so on that we can do so much more with Anna-Karin, with also finding the best way to support the women grassroots movement in Afghanistan. It's extremely important, and it's difficult where to start because. They need to have more safe spaces to meet, and they need to be more coordinated because they can influence, and they need to be this watchdog on the on the government to adhere to their commitments.
So now we're very close to these concrete aspects. What does participation mean in the daily reality of Afghan women? And I'm wondering, as a partner, as an organization with staff on the ground in Afghanistan, what can we do? What do we see are those obstacles that we can help remove when it comes to women's ability to participate? These basic kind of things, freedom of movement, safety, perhaps access to healthcare could be one of those also. A broader security perspective than purely the military, but still about basic security. What is it we can do?
I think that there are a lot of things to be done, and I think that many development actors in Afghanistan actually can do much more than they do today, and I think we can also become better in many areas. If we look at the operations of the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, I think being present in the villages is actually something that is kind of gender sensitive, because the possibility to move for women is extremely difficult. So you have to be where the women are. You cannot expect them to come to the towns or go to another village. You have to be there. And I think that is actually maybe one of the most important gender strategies that you can have. I think also it's very important to do some very, very strategic things. And I would say that our program with midwives is very, very important. The midwives, they are often we have schools for midwives, and the midwives that then go out in their villages, they are very often the only women that have a salary, that have a position in the village. And that is, of course, something that makes them very vulnerable and exposed, but it's also something that makes other women and men see that women can take this role, and other women can have that as a role model. And there I would say that the situation has changed dramatically since the last 10 years. When we started these schools, it was very, very difficult to get young women to participate in these educations, and we had to work a lot with the community elders and the religious leaders. Today, so many young women want to become a midwife, and I think that is one very, very important step. And then we have the nurses, we have the teachers, the female teachers, and I think if we look back to the development in Sweden, that is actually what happened in Sweden also, with the female nurses, the midwives, the teachers. They were the first that actually got this kind of position in the society. And if we look at the peace process as something that is, I mean, even though if we get a kind of peace stop for the violence and the kind of negotiation, to have peace in Afghanistan is something that will take many, many, many years. And to work with women having more and more possibilities to participate, to move around, I think that is important in the long run for how to keep the peace, because that is what we want in Afghanistan.
May I link to what Anna-Karin is also describing now? In the area of sexual reproductive health and rights is also an area where we have seen a very good example of how the men's involvement is, how they can be used as agents for change. We are working also with Mary Stopes International, giving family planning services and so on to Afghan women and men. And without having the religious leaders, the local mullahs here on board, it would never have been possible to succeed with this project at all. And now also we have found other actors for change, like the mullahs' wives or the mothers-in-laws and things like that. But here it's important to see the men's role also in us.
I thought also that we would just touch upon the subject of quotas. In Sweden we often have these heated discussions about quotas in corporate governance. And actually in Afghan politics on the national level we do have quotas. We have a quota for women in the Wolesi Jirga in the parliament. And I'm wondering, how has this been received in the Afghan society? Is it a model that functions, or should we instead look for other ways to get the women represented? What do you think, Engela?
Concerning the quotas for women, I can give an example at the Mishrani Jirga and upper house of the parliament, or Wolesi Jirga, or the lower house of the parliament. Of 69 of 249 seats of the parliament is reserved by women, each representing 2% or 2 representatives at the lower house of the parliament is representing from each province of Afghanistan. I think that was quite fulfilled as it was committed, even plus 1 extra. Of 28 out of 102, I think, of the Mishrani Jirga, or the upper house of the parliament, is also reserved seat for women. And this was either elected or indirectly appointed by the president of Afghanistan. I think it was quite good and a positive achievement for the women that they are representing, and it's almost more than the representatives compared to America. So I think it's a very positive achievement considering the quotas. However, there was a decrease in 2010, I think, from 25 to 20% when it was concerning the quotas for the community councils that women should represent, which was a concern, but that's not happening just now. I hope it will get better in the future.
But do you feel that the quota does not, it doesn't affect the legitimacy of the women who are representing the people? It's not an argument that is commonly around, that the women are elected through a quota?
I think it is good because the people are elected by the woman or by the people and population of Afghanistan. So I think it's a legitimate way to be done. Yeah.
Anna-Karin, you look like you want to add something.
No, I think it's. I think this is a very, very important that there are so many women in the parliament in Afghanistan and in other deciding bodies, and I think many of these women, they do a tremendous work. We have to remember all the time that there are women in Afghanistan working within this field. They are struggling and they are working extremely hard to make things change, and they succeed. They are put under extreme pressure, and there are strong forces that do not want them to succeed, but they are doing a very, very good job. And some of them are in the parliament, some of them are in other, like the district council and provincial councils. Some other women are maybe not doing such a good job, but I think why should all women do a good job? We expect that from all women, but not from all men. So, and women are not the same. There are some very conservative women, and there are some very progressive women. That is also very natural. It's like in Sweden. So we couldn't expect all women to be the same. But I think what is important is that they get a base for being able to influence. And if they take that chance, they can influence.
The good news that I heard recently by the president of Afghanistan is that he is going to improve this quota, that women's participation in the higher level as deputy ministers will increase in the future. So this is also a positive news or measures that was taken by the government of Afghanistan to increase women's participation in the higher level, or when he introduced a woman as the Attorney General of the High Court in Afghanistan, or Supreme Court in Afghanistan. That's also something that we see, that there is this struggle is going on, and the voice is going to be heard. And that's a positive thing for the Afghan woman, that we should have more role models in the Afghan society from the Afghan people, that others should be encouraged to come out and participate in all levels in the society.
These kind of role models were exactly the kind of examples I was looking for in the discussion. I think it's time to open up for some questions from the audience. We will have time for a few. Har vi en mikrofon? Ja.
Hi, Susanna Vasilevsky-Alfors from SIDA. The title of the seminar, Women's Right at the Center Negotiations, there was this aspect of getting women to the negotiations, but also I heard some voices like that it could be used as a sort of a captive by the Taliban, that okay, now we have women on board, but they don't really have any real rights, but at least we show it. Could you try to elaborate a bit on that? What are your perspectives?
This is something that is very, very difficult to really analyze, because in the statements that we have seen from the last talks, even though they are not official statements, but they have been put up on the Taliban homepage, they kind of write very, very strongly about women's participation and women's right to education and these things. But it's always said that it should be within the Islamic context and according to Sharia laws. And how they interpret these laws, we don't know really. So it's very difficult to really, really know in practice what this would mean. So they say quite a lot of good things, actually, or have said during the springtime, but in practice we don't know what that would mean.
And I can only agree, but that it's still a risk of compromising women's rights. But at least if we have commitments from the government in place, and we have a constitution and so on in Afghanistan saying that men and women are equal, and also the women are represented there. It's so much more difficult to compromise women's rights. So that's one thing. And I think also that Shukriya Barakshai, that was one of the women that were part of this negotiation in Oslo, she also said a very good thing, that it was very important that she was there also in not only like a women's representative, but she also represented a power position. She came from the Ministry of what do you say? Defense. Yes. So that's also important.
Any more questions? I think since we're talking around the potential of women's participation now, we could do a quick summarizing round where I would like you to elaborate on if women would be ruling Afghanistan for 1 year. If they would do so, how would the country change during that year?
This is a very tricky question, because the question is if the women will rule the country the coming years also, or not. Because in Afghanistan, all these strong forces that are working against the women, if they will come in power again after a year, then women need to be very cautious during this year. Otherwise, they will get in a lot of trouble after the year. But if, let's say that they will have the power for all the coming years, then of course I think that the violence would change, both on a military context but also on a kind of domestic, in the homes. I think that would be one of the very important issues that could happen. And I also think that they could get together and discuss much more how they want to develop Afghanistan, what is important for them. And I think that the children would benefit a lot, because we know that children benefit, the families benefit a lot if women are part of the decision-making process. Those are some things. I'm sure you have other things that you think would develop.
Well, agreeing with Anna-Karin, I am a little bit pessimistic about women ruling Afghanistan, because I see it almost impossible that women should rule Afghanistan, considering the most conservative, traditional, religious society that we have in Afghanistan. But I would say if women should come and occupy one of the three fundamental power in the country, I think that will be a significant difference in the country at all levels. For example, the Supreme Court, if it will be occupied by one of the women in the country, I think it will be good to fight corruption, because at all levels, there is no doubt that women are working extensively in the right way with according to the rule, but not men. This has researchers has proved is that if the woman, for example, can manage the small territories that's called the family, there's no doubt that they will manage to rule the country. But I don't see that women will take this position in the near future or in the longer future. So I hope they will come at one of the leading positions in the near future.
Marianne.
Okay. Many good examples have been said here, but I would want to think that women were more inclined to work together with, not so afraid to work side by side with men as equal partners, so that the segregation in Afghanistan between men and women would decrease a little bit. That is what I want to think. Yes, I think I said that.
Okay, time for us to wrap up here. We have a final message from the organizers, I understood. And if you wish to continue the discussion about Afghanistan and women's participation in the peace process, then please ignore the howling man and come to the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan's stand, which is over there. You can see the sign with the girl with the blue scarf.
And also welcome to the SIDA stand just next to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.